All right, thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. We have the joint city council meeting with the planning board for September 11th, 2024. This public meeting is, city council is recorded on Zoom with a link that is posted on the agenda. If you are calling on a phone, you can press *9 to request to speak. If you are watching on a computer or device, there's a raise hand button that you can tap or press to request to speak. Please use either of these options during oral communications to be recognized to speak. If technical difficulties arise and the Zoom link is interrupted during an in-person hybrid meeting of the City Council and tonight with the Planning Board, and there's a quorum present, the meeting may continue after efforts have been made to reestablish the link. The minutes should note the interruption. It is the finding of the City of Gloucester that no individual should be denied equal treatment or opportunity because of their age, ancestry, color, disability, including intellectual and developmental mental disability, family status, immigration status, gender identity or expression, military status, marital status, national origin, race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation. Tonight in attendance, we have for the city staff, we have Councilor Dylan Benson, Councilor Majota, Councilor Memhard, Councilor Grace, Councilor Grow, Councilor Gilman, myself, Councilor Nolan. We have our clerk, Grace Poria. On the line, we have Tony. Councilor Tony is on. Gross, yes. Yeah. We have Greg Catamatori, Suzanne, our city attorney. We have Alex, community development, and we have Jill Cahill, our CAO. And on the planning board, Rick, would you like to announce? I will be doing the flag salute and stuff afterwards, but you can open your meeting as well.
So I'd like to open the planning board meeting of September 11th. Call the meeting to order. Just introduction of the planning board members. I'm Rick Noonan, the chair, Vice Chair Jane Ramson, Hank McCarl, Beverly Bookin, and Sean Henry. And I believe Member Rosen will be joining us remotely. Okay, thank you. All right, the floor is yours.
Excellent. So at this point, I'd like to go with a flag salute and a moment of silence for September 11th. Councilor Grow, would you lead us in that?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. So tonight we're going to have this meeting, and we have a presentation that's going to be given to us, which will be forth. When we call on speakers to speak, we need everybody to come to the podium and speak in line. We'll be taking all people that are present first before we go to online comments. There's not going to be any interaction with the city council, answering any questions tonight. We're going to open this public meeting for comments. And after the comments, we're going to continue the public hearing until September 26th. I will make it clear that everybody must come to the podium to speak and state their name and address or residency. And speak directly into the microphone. There is a few questions out there. We have a group of people that have claimed that they would like to be in the opposition and take their 50 minutes for that time slot. Is Tracy O'Neill in the audience? Tracy, have you confirmed with your people that you're definitely in authority to command the 15 minutes for the opposition? Excellent. So thank you very much. And again, so we're going to have that happen. The city will present their presentation, and then we'll go through the opposition, and we'll bring people up in present, and then we'll go to online people. And when the meeting does come to a conclusion, it will be sent back to the 26th. We're making every available effort for anybody that wishes to be able to speak to have the opportunity to state their business in front of us so we can make a fair and best judgment for the city. So with that being said, I'd like to hand the mic over to the planning board, and they can have forth with Greg Cadamatore and Emily if they like. I'm sorry, I do have to open the public hearing.
And likewise, Mr. Chairman.
2024-25, RZ 2024-003, amend GCO regarding 3A zoning amendments. Sorry about that.
Okay, just for our housekeeping, so this is a public hearing of the planning board as well. Again, as a joint meeting, so in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law 40A, Section 5, and the Gloucester Zoning Ordinance, GZO Section 1.11, the planning board shall hold a public hearing to consider the amendments to the GZO to permit as of right multifamily uses in compliance with MGL Chapter 40A, Section 3A, by deleting the existing Section 5.30 and inserting a new Section 5.30, Multifamily Overlay District, MFOD, an associated zoning map adding multifamily overlay after VB in Section 5.11.3, asterisk 1, and by adding projects of 6 or more dwelling units in the Maplewood Ave area and the Schoolhouse Road area sub-districts of the multifamily overlay district in sections 5.8.2, applicability of the site plan review ordinance. So that is
Excellent.
it.
Thank you for,
I'm sorry that Council Worthley is with us.
good evening, Greg Cadamatore, Planning Director, and I'm going to share my screen. Everybody see that? Okay. So if you've been following this process, this presentation will look fairly familiar to folks. It's about the third iteration of it, but I think it's very important for everybody to understand exactly what's being proposed and what's not being proposed. This effort was conducted by our department in the Community Development Department, along with the Planning Board and with technical assistance from RKG Associates, as well as Innes Associates. And Emily Innes, the principal, is here this evening, who will be taking the second half of the presentation to talk about the actual language. So just overview, I'm going to go through our requirements for Gloucester to comply with the MBTA Communities Act, the process to date with some of the meetings and outcomes of those meetings, what ultimately became the putting it all together kind of final district delineation, and then the zoning that came after that to basically reflect what was determined to be the scenario that was going to move forward to a zoning amendment. And then I'll touch on some of the amendments that or revisions that were suggested by the Planning and Development Standing Committee last week. And then we'll turn it over to the presiders of the public hearing to take public testimony. So this should look familiar to folks. It's been on the city website for almost 2 years. The action plan that was developed back in late 22, of the timeline that we would, and the process that we would undergo to get to this point. And the red dot, we are now at the legislative sessions to consider the adoption of the zoning. We've moved a little bit of that dot since the last few weeks as this has progressed. And again, the intention will be for the council to have disposition on the proposed amendments. And if favorable, then we will submit an application to HLC for compliance. Anybody wants to learn more about this, watch the entire process as it unfolded for the last 9 months. All the meetings that have been conducted associated with this have been recorded, or presentations that were made are all available on the city website. The top banner, there's a tab that you can click, 3A zoning info, and it'll take you to a page that has all of that information. So again, if you've been watching, I'm sorry, this is going to be repetitive, but that's going to be very similar to what was presented last week. So what are the requirements? As a identified MBTA community, along with 176 other communities, we need to create an as-of-right zoning district of reasonable size, and there's dimensions associated with that, and zone for a certain capacity, and have a minimum density of 15 units per acre. There are a number of communities that have already conducted this. They've submitted all their applications for compliance, the rapid transit communities. We've been identified as a commuter rail community because we have 2 rail stops, and our deadline for submission is December of this year. And there are others along with us that are also meeting that deadline, adjacent communities, and then there are the additional communities that will have to comply by the end of next year. So the metrics are kind of broken down into land requirements and then capacity requirements. We have to zone a minimum of 50 acres. We have to have at least 50% of the area that we zone within one of the station areas. It can be split between the two. And we also have to have one large district that is at least 50% of the total acreage that we zone. These are all very technical. They are all in a way, and I want to I'll use a certain phrase, they take a lot of creativity away from the ability to come up with solutions. And that's, I think, what you'll find that the planning board found as well. There are a lot of good ideas that were presented in the very beginning of this, but to comply, a lot of them were ruled out just because of the way the guidelines are set up. From a capacity perspective, and I stress capacity, this is not new units. This is what the zoning district that's created allows to happen. It is blind to what's on the ground right now, but as you can probably imagine, if there's a certain use that you're permitting and it already exists on a lot, there's not going to be any change on that lot other than replacing it with the same number of units that are there today. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. Another kind of guideline or requirement that really confounded a lot of the effort is also that half of the capacity that we have to zone for has to be located within one of the station areas. So I know there's a lot of criticism about where the districts have finally been identified, but from the get-go, most of it was going to have to be within one of the half-mile radii around the station areas. So it's no surprise that that's where the majority of the zoning occurs. And there's also, again, this minimum contiguous district size, 50% of the total acreage is one of the things that really prevented the ability from zoning outside of those areas, because the more that you do out, the larger of a district that you have to have within. And again, the minimum requirement of 15 units per acre, and I'll give you a couple of visuals about what that looks like right now. Much of the downtown area is already beyond that. And that's essentially what we're kind of mirroring in terms of development patterns with the zoning districts that have been identified. So at the very beginning, the state also supplied every community with a map of exclusions. So these are all areas that could not be included in a district, or if they were, they would not count towards any of the capacity, because essentially they're suggesting that no units could be built within them because they were either publicly controlled, so you could zone a large piece of city-owned land and then just sit on it and not do anything. There has to be an opportunity for housing to actually be created. But there are also areas that we'd probably avoid anyway. We're not looking to zone in areas of open space, protected wetlands. Right-of-ways are also excluded from consideration. You can't just zone your roads. You could probably come up to maybe 50 acres, but you can't do it that way. And then also some institutional uses. Again, they're pretty set. They're probably not going to change a lot. So they identified a number of things that we were not allowed to use as part of our compliance model. And again, I think in retrospect, the first meeting that we had, we didn't really have the opportunity to go into a lot of the details of the minimum requirements, which I think, again, we wanted to see just people's thoughts and share their thoughts about where they think it's appropriate for multifamily housing in the community. We received a lot of different ideas, but I don't think we grounded folks enough in where things couldn't be located. So learning process. I'm just going to focus in on 3 metrics: the minimum of 50 acres, the capacity of 2270, and the 15 units per acre, because I think it's a really something that everyone has to wrap their minds around to understand. The technical language of the ordinance is really just trying to reflect these visuals. So just to give people a sense of what 50 acres looks like, this is a visual of the half-mile radius, which is in the teal color, which is about 500 acres, 128 to the waterfront, over the high school. And the green circle within, which runs from about the intersection of Cleveland Ave and maybe down to about Prospect and Pine Street, that's 50 acres. So again, there was a lot of discussion about the flexibility of what we were allowed to consider, but then at the same time, there's a lot of the requirements that kind of take out the creativity. So this is just a visual taken from a website, Opticos, just to give people a sense of what kind of density looks like. So this kind of runs from a single-family home on the left, extending all the way to a mid-rise on the right. So again, with that 50 acres, we could have taken an approach where we zoned for about that minimum, but we would have had to have done it at a density of about 45 units per acre. So that's similar to the density of like the Halyard apartments, if folks are familiar with that. So you'd be looking at, some district of that size. Think of that kind of green area in the center of town at a fairly high density. I don't think that's what anybody was thinking at the time, but that would get you also to the capacity of that 2270 if you zoned for that type of density. On the other end of the spectrum, if you were to consider, and the basic definition of multifamily in the law is 3 units or more, or 2 or more structures with 2 or more units. We could have also taken a purely 3-family approach, and we would have to zone 151.3 acres at that same minimum density, and again, that would get you to your capacity. So just to give folks a sense of what that 15 units per acre might look like, this is Exchange Street between Harold Ave and Washington, and it's a mix of 1, 2, and 3 family right now. If you were to calculate what the actual density of that street is right now with 37 units on it, it's over the target. It's over the target of 15 units per acre. It's almost 17. So to give a sense of again, what that feels like in terms of that 15 units per acre, it's much of the downtown as it is right now. But it doesn't meet that minimum requirement of having all 3 families. And again, there's those other parameters that have to be considered. So you could also, again, in terms of the flexibility, you don't have to zone all the same way. You can create sub-districts with higher density, smaller districts with high density, large districts with low density. So here's an example just showing you could target a 40 units per acre, smaller district, 16.5 acres to give you a certain amount of that zoned capacity, and then a larger district at a 3-family at 15 units per acre to give you the balance. And that's kind of where we arrived. You'll see that there's sub-districts, and some of them are at higher density, and then there's some larger districts that are at the minimum density. A couple other metrics, again, I mentioned already, the 50% of the total area that we zone, and we have a number of, I think, around 180 acres. Half of that was going to have to be within one or both of the station areas, and there has to be at least one district that's half of that total acreage. So those are really the things that drive the scenario that was arrived at, along with a lot of consideration by the planning board of other things they wanted to try to include in this. And I'll go through some of the things that we heard in the process that have kind of been infused in the final scenario. And I just show this last graphic again to not stress enough that from the get-go, because of the way the law was set up, because of the way the guidelines were set up, there was always going to have to be the majority of the zoned area within one of these two areas. And the planning board, I think, did their best to explore different ways that could be achieved and also look across the two station areas. And you'll find that there's area in both of those districts. So process and outcomes. I could have included another meeting way back in February where the council received an overview of the law and the requirements. Since that point, we've held 3 public forums. The first one, the Lego meeting. Again, maybe in a lot of eyes, it wasn't the most successful meeting, but I think we did also receive a lot of feedback, caused us to pivot and realize that we had to have a broader Q&A session just about what this all meant. So it took a little bit of a half step back. And back in May, we held a Q&A session where we hung out here for a couple hours and answered as many questions as we could. Then it started to move into the planning board process, along with some representation from P&D at a few meetings to start talking about what we heard in terms of overall feedback of where we could locate things and what type of approaches we would start to test. And I will stress also, it's an iterative process. You have ideas, we hand it off to the consultants, they model it, it doesn't always work. There's a lot of trial and error to arrive at does this scenario actually comply? At the second public forum, we had 3 distinct scenarios. One that really took an approach that you've probably heard the term paper compliance, that really tried to see are there ways that we can really minimize the impact of this zoning so that very little happens. We also had on the other end of the spectrum something that was a little bit more pro-housing and really was trying to create a lot of opportunity. And again, we have a minimum capacity, a minimum density, a minimum land area. And one of the driving questions was, are we trying to meet those requirements, or are we doing something else? Are we zoning for capacities that are way beyond that 2270? And some of those scenarios were up to 5,000 units. And I think we got a lot of feedback on that. So taking all that into consideration, we moved this into a subcommittee of the planning board so that they would be able to meet a little bit more nimbly rather than trying to assemble 7 folks and really kind of dig down and get into the weeds of developing final scenarios. So that was through the course of most of July, meeting almost weekly. By the time we got to the middle of July, a final scenario was agreed upon by the planning board to then move into the actual drafting of an ordinance that's reflective of what's been laid out in terms of the where and what type of multifamily housing in the geographic areas that were identified. That brought us to August, where Emily Innes, who's here, presented a draft that was, again, reflective of a model that complies with all of the regulations, and that's what's before you at this point. So what did we hear along the way? Some of these comments are probably from the initial meetings, but also at the public forums, and also folks wrote into MBTA feedback at gloucester-ma.gov. Look at options throughout the community. And again, I can't stress that a lot of that was done. Not every area of the community can actually even be modeled. A lot of it was a situation where we would identify an area, we would hand that off to RKG to start modeling it, and the answer was simply, it just can't work. You have to have yield. You can't zone an area with a certain lot size. If none of the lots in that area comply, it doesn't count for anything towards the capacity. and it doesn't count towards anything towards the goal of trying to meet those requirements. So again, it just starts to go down this path of you have to zone more and more, or you have to start considering much higher density. And I think there were other comments like include affordability. There's nothing in the law that talks about affordability. And the question was, are there ways to leverage this process to trigger our inclusionary ordinance so that we'll actually have the potential for affordable housing to be created? No high-rise apartments. There's a lot of references to adjacent communities or communities on the North Shore that have more of a higher density districts in those communities and not wanting to see that happen in Gloucester. Don't put it all in the downtown area. And again, confounded by the requirements. It was always going to have to be in one of those two areas predominantly. What about the West Gloucester Station? And you'll find there's an example of there is a district that's been identified in that area, which also had a lot of excluded areas. So it's very limited in terms of what could be done. Locate districts near infrastructure. I think this is consistent with the spirit and intent of the law. And also, again, nobody was, I won't say nobody, but I think one of the principles was we're not going to just locate a district in the middle of nowhere with no infrastructure where nothing can ever happen. We wanted to really stay to the intent and purpose of the law. Preserve our open spaces. Again, these aren't my words, they're words that we heard. Promote needed housing development. I think there are probably some folks that think that this effort hasn't gone far enough. And I think, that's one of those things of compromise. If nobody's happy, maybe we did a good job. Take a minimal approach. And again, I think you'll find that some of the aspects of this are fairly measured in their approach. Again, because I think we also heard a lot of not wanting high density projects, and we have the backbone in the community of a lot of 3-family in certain areas, and that is the minimum requirement for a multifamily under the law. So the final zoning districts. The planning board kind of took the consideration of the work of the subcommittee, input from P&D, considered the model constraints and the 3A requirements. We have a scenario that meets the density and capacity standards, the 2270 that I spoke of, and the 15 units per acre. It considered a sub-district to include the Housing Authority property on Maplewood Ave, Willowwood, which again, taking this process and trying to leverage it to support affordable housing, as well as a small sub-district up near Schoolhouse Road to leverage a site that's been dormant since 2009, potentially for housing that could potentially also trigger our inclusionary ordinance. Refine the station area, the downtown station area sub-districts again. What do we need to zone versus taking some approaches that maybe were a little bit broader, had a higher capacity than trying to hit that target of 2270. And also identifying some areas in, again, the R5 is the backbone that we'll talk about. Areas of the R5 that are not appropriate to be included in a 3A district. We didn't want to include any areas that were in floodplain. We also wanted to avoid the historic district because that can create some complexity from a permitting perspective that the state might not see as truly as of right because there's another permit that's required. And then finally, in the downtown area, the consideration of as of right in that large station area in the downtown area that you'll see, as well as the West Gloucester, the limit is a 3-family. And I'll stress that over and over again. I did it last week. I can't believe that was last week. And a few weeks before that, limited to a 3-family. And I'll show you some examples of what that looks like. So the districts that were identified, there's on the left is the dark line is the half-mile radius around the downtown station, and there's numbered districts 1 through 5. You'll see very, very soon when Emily gets through this that districts 1, 2, and 3, which are the kind of mint chip, bright yellow, and magenta, are all currently R5 districts that are considered as one sub-district, but this is just to contrast and show where those areas were identified in the downtown area. The magenta in the center is a combination of the Gloucester Mills building as well as the Housing Authority. One of the other metrics I didn't mention is any district has to be at least 5 acres in size. So sometimes adjoining properties were added for specific reasons to meet that minimum requirement. And then number 5, which is at this point white, it's blue on my screen. It's blue for people that are online. That is a district that was created that encompasses the Halyard Apartments as well as the property across the street from Gloucester Crossing Road, vacant parcel. And again, it had to meet that minimum of 5 acres. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see from the areas that are colored green and purple and brown, those are all areas that were excluded. There's much of that area is part of our public water supply watershed for good reason. We don't want to zone in those areas. And the smaller orange area in the center of that kind of flanks either side of Essex Ave is another sub-district that was identified again for potential 3-family use. So I just have one more visual that really I think was extremely helpful in kind of getting the point across, not only to planning board members as we were considering the options in the downtown area, but also to kind of show people why only portions of the R5 were included. So this graphic, everything in red is either undersized for what the zoning that's been created, in which case they will not be able to take advantage of an as-of-right scenario, or it's another zoning district entirely. So we have extensive business and neighborhood business and central business all within this half-mile radius. And as well as the historic district, publicly owned lands, all those exclusions. So everything in red is kind of off the table for the pursuit of a permit under this ordinance. And so you can kind of see the beige are all things that are potentially compliant. So this is a little bit of a Rorschach. If you go back and forth, those district areas were identified in areas where there was the least amount of lots that wouldn't comply, because a non-compliant lot is kind of like 0 in the scenario. It doesn't have any potential. It dilutes density. And again, we have that 15 units per acre that we have to satisfy. So if you were to grab areas that had a lot of non-compliant lots, it would, again, dilute the density. You'd have to zone more. You'd have to zone some areas at higher density. So just again, I showed you an example of a street in downtown with a density that was over the target. Also, just to give you an example of the type of structures that we're talking about, they may not look like this. There's a lot of architectural detail. We have a lot of beautiful buildings in the downtown, not well beyond the historic district. But 3-family is the backbone of this proposal. So looking at some of these structures, many of them may be eligible if they had 1 or 2 units in them now for additional units to be created, as long as they meet all of the requirements of the ordinance: parking requirements, height requirements, setback requirements. That's the only means of moving forward. Already talked about the West Gloucester district. Again, flanking either side of Essex Ave, smaller district. Not a lot of consideration in that area beyond because of the need to have a coherent zoning that allows lots that will comply. So this smaller district was identified again as another one that where 3-family could be considered if it meets all the zoning requirements. 3-family, and I'll just say it a couple more times because most of this zoning is really about 3-family, and then there are 2 specialty districts that really only have 1 lot each that have an opportunity for the approaches that I talked about in terms of trying to leverage either support to the Gloucester Housing Authority for some potential additional affordable housing, or leveraging a site to trigger our inclusionary ordinance, create some market rate housing as well as inclusionary or affordable housing. So currently in the R5 district, again, think about the magenta or the mint, the yellow, and the pink, those areas of the R5. The current requirements for a 3-family, they have a parking requirement of 1 space per unit. They are limited to 30 feet in height. They require a zoning board of appeals special permit for the use. And if they don't comply in some way, they may have to pursue variances. After that public process, they have to pursue a building permit that has review of all departments and has additional requirements. Doesn't mean you're done if you just get the use permit. There's all the utility consideration. They have to comply with the zoning ordinance, and it gets that internal review as well. In the scenario that we're talking about for those districts, if you meet the requirements that Emily will go through, you can go right to the building permit process. But again, you have to comply with everything they have to comply with now, other than that special permit process. And I gave a little test, so if anybody's watched. Looking at this structure, I asked people in the room what they thought the building height was. And then we heard a wide range of 26, 28, 32. It's 34.9 feet. So that's important consideration. One of the height requirements in this area will be 35 feet. So that's one other aspect of if somebody were to pursue a three-family in this structure, if they met the parking requirements, if they met all the other dimensional requirements, they would now not have to seek a height exception from the Zoning Board of Appeals to add a unit in this structure. Likewise, if there's a new structure proposed, meet all the requirements, but that 35 feet is one of the new considerations for a three-family in these districts. So again, just for comparative purposes, everything kind of in that middle column to the top, the current process for permitting a three-family, Zoning Board of Appeals special permit, maybe a variance if it's in a side yard setback or a front yard setback. That process has notice to abutters, newspaper advertisement, similar to what we did in advance of this meeting. Hold a public hearing, board renders a decision, files the decision, appeal period. If there's no appeal, record with the Registry of Deeds, and then they enter the building permit process, where again, they have to meet all the requirements that any residential construction needs to meet. In the 3A process, in these districts that most of the districts that are currently R5 that are a part of an overlay that Emily will describe, it's really just taking that front end off of a public process where, again, for a three-family, if you meet all the requirements, you should receive a special permit. We have requirements, we set up rules. It's not a if, it's a if you meet the requirements, you should receive a permit. So that's something that over the years used to be a city council special permit. It was moved down to a zoning board of appeals special permit. 2 years ago, it was considered to potentially be something very similar to this. And again, let's go back 2 years. We didn't have all the guidelines and requirements, and the scenario that we were talking about 2 years ago actually wouldn't have complied. So again, at this point, we have something that's much smaller in geographic area, but has some of that same consideration that was presented a couple of years ago in terms of simplifying the process for small projects for the addition of 1 or 2 units in the downtown area. So the ultimate decision of the planning board was based on focusing the districts near transit and amenities, considering all that we heard, and again, understanding the limitations of what's possible with the guidelines that were presented. I think the development patterns were really taken into consideration, and what's been proposed is very consistent with the surrounding. We're not talking about putting a 60-foot structure next to something that's been having to comply with a 30-foot height requirement for the last 40, 50 years. It generally allows what is permitted, and I think this is something that gets lost somewhere along the way. When something is in a use category, whether it's a Y or an SP or a CC, which are all identifying either yes, by right, which is what we're talking about right now, I just need a building permit, SP, a special permit that's issued by Zoning Board of Appeals or the City Council, or a CC or a CCS. These are all things that are allowed in the community if you meet the requirements. So that's just, this is not, we're creating something new that's not allowed. It's something that's allowed, but it's just a different permitting process. So the other thing that I want to stress for the other 2 districts, again, hearing a lot about affordable housing. There's nothing in this law. There's nothing that the planning board had to consider, city council had to consider to try to create affordable housing. There are 2 sub-districts in here that are specifically identified to encourage affordable housing associated with 3A. And that's the Maplewood Ave site, controlled by the Gloucester Housing Authority, as well as a vacant site that's already been considered for higher density development in the past. So I showed you those two images with the various pastel colors and the orange color. This is the actual zoning map. So there are 4 sub-districts that Emily will describe. The yellow is all area that's currently zoned R5. That's part of the downtown station area. The magenta in the center is what we call the Maplewood area sub-district. That's the Mill Building as well as the Gloucester Housing Authority. The purple district is the Schoolhouse Road district that is Halyard as well as the vacant site across the street. And then there's the orange West Gloucester Station area sub-district. So Emily will be speaking about these different areas. They all have different requirements. And with that, I will hand it over to Emily, and I do want to check my battery. I think we're okay.
That's good, Greg, because I don't want to mime the zoning.
Or
Perfect.
you could just use the space bar.
Beautiful. Thank you. Councilors, planning board members, thank you very much for having me. For the record, my name is Emily Ennis. I'm president of Ennis Associates, and it's been my privilege to work with the city on creating the zoning. I just want to define a couple of terms before we start, or a couple of concepts. Greg went over a lot of technical information about compliance, but at some point, this has to be translated into zoning, into the language that the city rather, can use to evaluate whether or not somebody's application for a change actually meets the ordinance. Every property owner in this room has property that is zoned. Zoning gives a property owner permission or sometimes prohibits a property owner from doing something. But it is an option. So if you own a piece of property, maybe it has a house on it, maybe it has a commercial building on it, you have certain privileges because there's zoning on it, you have certain restrictions because it has zoning on it. We refer to that as a base zoning district. That is the base district that's sitting on. And in many cases, there is only that base zoning district. What we're talking now is something called an overlay district. And an overlay district, you can think of it as sitting on top of that base district. So here's what you as a property owner can do now with the zoning. And here on top of that is a second option. That is the overlay district. And it gives you another possibility as a property owner. And I do want to stress possibility, option. Nobody has to take advantage of the zoning. They have to comply with what is there now, but they don't have to make the choice to take advantage of something else. So that's the first thing that I just want to clarify. The second thing in many of the communities I've been hearing about is that there has been a confusion about what as of right means under zoning. And I've heard people in other communities say, oh, but that means somebody can build whatever they want. And Greg mentioned this already, but I do want to stress that nobody can build what they want. They have to comply with the zoning. And when they comply with the zoning, they have to comply, and I'll mention this again, they have to comply with either the base district or the overlay district. They can't pick and choose. So keep those in mind as we move forward. And this will hopefully start, as I repeat them, you'll already have heard those terms. So you've seen this map before. We probably don't have it in enough places, so I may jump back to it a couple of times, but just noting where the districts are. One key thing I do want to mention is you see a round circle here, that half-mile radius. It is important to understand that the zoning we're talking about tonight does not apply throughout that half-mile radius on either the downtown or West Gloucester. It only applies to the areas that are colored in within that half-mile radius. So anything that doesn't have a color, anything that's white is not covered by this overlay district. So when we start to build zoning for compliance, we know what the parameters from the compliance model are. We know what the geography is. We have a couple of sources for starting to build the actual text. The first is HLC provided a sample zoning bylaw or zoning ordinance that's a community could use. as a starting point. And so we always start with that because HLC had that. It's critically important to understand that it is sample zoning that can be tailored to meet the needs of the community. The next place I always start is with the community's existing zoning. So I went to the City of Gloucester zoning ordinance. There are some zoning components that are not in the compliance model, are not part of the geographic analysis, that a community, again, can tailor within the zoning to make sure that the zoning is reflective of their needs as a community. So starting with your existing zoning ordinance, I went through and tailored the sample zoning to get to a point where it was a Gloucester ordinance and not a sample zoning ordinance. One of these places is the purpose, and that's the first section you see up there. And I believe this is online, so I'm just going to hit the highlights. The purpose is why are we doing this? Beyond the idea of complying with Section 3A, why else might Gloucester want to do this? So the idea of a variety of housing and sizes and types that meet the needs of the Gloucester community, where the housing is being placed within walking distance of public transit, the ability to preserve open space by putting any new potential development where there's already existing infrastructure rather than building out into the open spaces that have not been developed. These are meant to be tailored to Gloucester, so feel free to continue to tailor them, but this gives you a basis to start with in terms of the purpose. The second thing is we have to establish that overlay district, and so it's established geographically with the map that you just saw and with the downtown station area, West Gloucester station area, so the yellow and the orange, and then the pink and the blue or purple, depending on your eyesight, of Maplewood or Schoolhouse Road. So those are the sub-districts of this overlay district. It also establishes that relationship I mentioned earlier between the overlay district and the base zoning. You can't say, oh, I like the use in the base zoning, but I'd rather have the dimensional standards in the overlay zoning. If you are a property owner, you have to pick one and you have to stay with the rules of that district as you move forward. That's what that paragraph says. Use is allowed by right. So in this case, we are allowing housing in this overlay district. And this is where the different sub-districts are starting to diverge. In the downtown station area and the West Gloucester station area, the yellow and orange, you're allowed to have single-family housing, two-family housing, or 3 dwelling units. So that's it. Under this overlay, there are no other uses allowed. It's 1, 2, or 3 units. And that is, as you'll see later, that is units per lot or units per parcel. In Maplewood Avenue area and the Schoolhouse Road area, it is a multifamily dwelling with 4 or more residential dwelling units, or this goes into the kind of confusing definition of multifamily, residential dwelling units of 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling unit in each building. At a minimum, that's 2 duplexes meet that definition. So that's the only thing. If you are choosing to develop under the overlay in one area, you're restricted to 1, 2, or 3 dwelling units per lot. In the other, it's 4 or more, and you're going to see that there's a restriction of dwelling units per acre for those 2. So just again, so you can see the downtown station area in the yellow, 1, 2, or 3, West Gloucester Station in the orange, 1, 2, or 3, Maplewood Avenue, Schoolhouse Road, 4+. The dimensional table is another set of controls. So you can control what's happening on a parcel or a lot by the use, which we just did in the previous section. You can control it by the dimensions, and the dimensions govern where the building can be placed on the lot, how big the building can be. And so what you see here is the next set of differences between the downtown station, West Gloucester station area, and Maplewood Ave and Schoolhouse Road. So I'm not going to go through every dimension. I'm going to call out the differences. So downtown station, West Gloucester Station, we're looking at lot area minimums of 4,000 and 6,000 square feet. Now, Greg had mentioned this idea of looking at the existing development patterns of the area. Much of our neighborhood areas are built, in New England especially, are built prior to zoning coming into effect. In some communities in Massachusetts, zoning didn't actually show up until the 1950s. Obviously, Gloucester's a lot older than 1950. So what we find is when the zoning came into effect, when it was put over these districts, what's on the ground, those tight-knit neighborhoods that people love, isn't actually what the zoning says. So we talk about right-sizing our zoning districts to match what's there. And the 4,000, 6,000 from the work of the city earlier is to get to more of that right-sizing of what's actually there. You're going to see that there's a difference between that and Maplewood Ave and Schoolhouse Road. These two areas have larger parcels. So they are what's called a builder's acre of 40,000 square feet. So your parcel, in order to develop on a parcel, Maplewood Ave or Schoolhouse Road, it has to be at least 40,000 square feet. So there's the difference in scale and the parcel sizes. Anything below that is non-conforming. It is unbuildable as a lot size under this. The next thing I want to call out is the building height maximum. So downtown West Gloucester and Maplewood Avenue, which of course, if you remember, is the pink surrounded by the yellow. Those all have a maximum building height of 35 feet. Schoolhouse Road, which has a Horton's Yard across from it, is a little bit higher to match kind of the existing, that close set environment of the empty parcel and the Horton's Road. So there's a difference there, or Horton's Yard, sorry. Dwelling units per lot, again, if you have a parcel in downtown or West Gloucester, you can only have 3 units on that parcel. That means if you have 4,000 or a 6,000, 3 units. If you have a 20,000 square foot lot, although I don't think there are that many, 3 units. If you were to actually have an acre in that downtown area, again, I don't think there's that many, 3 units. So it's solely by lot. In Maple Avenue and Schoolhouse Road, it is 40 dwelling units per acre. So that 40,000 builder's acre, 40 dwelling units. If you had a 20,000, you couldn't build on it because you would need to, that's non-conforming. It's less than an acre. 20,000 square feet is less than an acre. If it was a 2-acre lot, it would be 2 times 40 or 80 dwelling units. So that's another way of restricting. And then I do also want to call out those components are part of the model that Greg mentioned earlier. But things like the front yard setback, the side yard setback, the rear yard setback, all controls that you see here, all methods of determining where a building is placed on a lot. Those we primarily drew from the existing zoning. So again, going back to what City of Gloucester already had and putting that into the zoning so that there would be some familiarity. Another place that we took primarily from the existing zoning are the parking regulations. So 1 space per dwelling unit for downtown West Gloucester and Maplewood Ave, 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit in Schoolhouse Road area. My understanding is the way that Gloucester has done that is if you end up with a 0.5 parking space, you have to round up, so you get a little bit of extra parking. These are drawn from existing standards that you have in your zoning. Greg mentioned the idea of affordability, affordable housing rather, and the compliance guidelines that HLC has in place does limit that affordability. They don't require that you have affordable housing, but if you do, what they recommend, what they state is that it has to be 10% of units at 80% of area median income, and you have to round down, unless you do an economic feasibility analysis. And that economic feasibility analysis, which is a technical study, can justify, it's used to justify a higher level of affordability. In other words, could you build housing in a community that would be financially feasible at that higher level of affordability? If the EFA says yes, then you can do that. Now, one of the concerns that was relayed to me as part of the earlier process is that Gloucester did want to do a deeper level of affordability, especially, and in fact, it only applies the Maplewood Avenue and Schoolhouse Road areas. And I am delighted to say that my colleagues at RKG did an EFA. It was a positive result, and that means when this zoning goes to HLC with the EFA, Gloucester can put in that higher level. It still has to be approved by HLC, as the zoning as a whole has, but it is good news that you're able to do that to address some of those issues. And then finally, want to call out some of the other controls. So we've talked about height, we've talked about dimensional standards, we've talked about use. Greg, I think, had mentioned briefly, and I want to reiterate that it's not just zoning that controls what happens on a site. It is also Conservation Commission, if they have jurisdiction in an area. It is Board of Health. This is mostly with infrastructure, but I certainly have some communities where it's septic systems, and the septic system would have an impact on the zoning, or any other restrictions that would normally come in still have an impact still on the potential development. The 3A zoning does not supersede, does not set those aside. In addition, this would go under site plan review. There are standards in the zoning for site plan review that cover what's going on with the site: access, parking, landscape, where mechanicals and dumpsters go, what the requirements are for surface parking and integrated garages, like in a 3-family that might have a garage inside of it. It also talks about building standards for what do you do with infill development, in terms of making sure that there's sympathetic to the existing context, the massing scale and the proportion of the buildings, entryways, materiality, and the relationship of multiple buildings on a lot. For our yellow and orange districts, the downtown and the West Gloucester, that's going to be less of an issue, but it could potentially have an impact in the long run on Maplewood and Schoolhouse Ave. There's a couple of additional changes that you have to do whenever you introduce a new zoning district. These are technical changes at the end, so we have to add it to the list of zoning districts in the ordinance. We have to make site plan review applicable to projects of 6 or more dwelling units in the Maplewood Avenue area and the Schoolhouse area subdistrict, so those standards will apply. We are actually replacing an existing zoning ordinance, 5.30, an existing section with this, and that's because it had a sunset provision that expired in 2020. So we're just taking it off the books and replacing it with this. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Greg. Thank you for listening, and happy to listen to comments.
And I just wanted to follow up from the meeting from last week. Planning and Development Standing Committee made a recommendation to move this forward for the public hearing, and also made a couple of revisions to the draft. So in your packets, if anybody's looking at the City Council packet, there's a draft that's dated September 4th that has a couple of other revisions to it. This table was shown by Emily just previously. There's been an additional footnote that's been added. So a number of footnotes were kind of relettered so that they're consistent as how they appear, referencing different points in the ordinance, in the table. So the first one was associated with lot area. I think one of the things that was stressed, again, we have an underlying district for much of the area that's been zoned in this effort that has R5 requirements. And in these dimensional requirements, there is a slightly smaller minimum lot size, but wanted to make it very clear that these standards only apply to what's on the ground right now. You cannot create a new 4,000 square foot lot in the R5 by using these requirements. So there was a footnote added to really stress that and make it kind of a belt and suspenders. That was the intention. It was mentioned, I know, Vice Chair Remsen had mentioned that at several meetings over and over again, trying to create clarity as to what the proposal is, doesn't allow you to do that. So there's been some language added to make sure that that's clear. And there was also some discussion around the building height in the West Gloucester and downtown station area. Again, with it being to 35 feet, there are other things that you can potentially require. And one consideration was also for a peaked roof. So again, they've been re-lettered. So there's now a footnote on lot area that says the lot area requirements for as-of-right residential structures in the MFOD shall only apply to lots in existence at the effective date of the adoption of the MFOD. So again, when we get to that point, if the council does vote favorably, the date of enactment will reflect those lots that are in existence at that time that can potentially take advantage of the as-of-right zoning. Building height, again, this is a consideration that was introduced at the P&D level. This would be a footnote, again, on the West Gloucester station area, as well as the downtown station area subdistricts. The roof of a residential structure permitted in the downtown station area and West Gloucester station area subdistricts shall have a pitch of at least 4/12, as appropriate to the massing of the proposed building. And there was an example, this is a graphic that P&D considered at its last meeting. Nobody can see that other than I can barely even see it. But there's a variety of roof lines and they kind of progress from a fairly flat roof in the first row down from the triangle. And then they go to a very peak roof. We're not in Switzerland. But again, there was a kind of a minimum requirement of a pitch roof that was suggested by the P&D subcommittee. And then finally, this draft was also reviewed by the Attorney General's office. There was one slight modification to the language that was proposed addressing site plan review. Again, a little bit of a wordsmithing. It used to read that projects of 6 or more dwelling units shall be required to submit an application for site plan review. And the suggestion was to reword that a little bit more explicitly to say that it shall require site plan review. Again, you don't just file an application, you actually have to go through the process. So we took that into consideration and made that slight modification. So with that, that's the end of the presentation of the proposal, and I'll turn it back to the chairman and the vice president.
Greg and Emily, you did a great job tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to see if the CAO would like to come up and have a few words, please. CEO Cahill.
Good evening, Mr. Vice President, through you to the council members, and Mr. Chairman, through you to the planning board members. I'm here on behalf of Mayor Verga tonight because he is at a school committee meeting. So I just want to say a few words. Since 2021, Mayor Verga has been very clear that Gloucester will comply with the state law known as MBTA Communities Act, Section 3A of 40A. He submitted an action plan that included time for both community engagement and careful consideration and deliberation of the strategies that could bring us into compliance. We believe the proposal that the planning board has moved forward is consistent with both the housing needs and the housing wants of our community, as well as the AG office has confirmed that it is not in conflict with 3A. On behalf of the mayor, I want to start by thanking the planning board members. You all did an incredible amount of work on this, including the staff. Thank you, Greg and Alex and our consultants. And most importantly, thank you to all of you, everyone who's been a part of this process. There's been hundreds of people coming out for these meetings, and it's incredibly important to the result that comes out of it. So thank you to everyone in this audience tonight. Whether you're for it or not, your input's really important to the mayor, the administration, this council, and the planning board. The mayor and this administration fully support the proposal before you tonight. It expands the rights for small property owners in the area by simplifying the permitting process. It will help Gloucester achieve its housing goals, making it easier to create housing options that are more attainable for all of our residents, including seniors and young families, and our everyday workers, including our city workers, school teachers, firemen, and the like. It strategically creates opportunities for affordable housing, which we want to commend the planning board for doing. It was not a requirement of 3A, And it was clearly outlined by the public as a need, and you all deserve kudos for thinking that through. And it brings us into compliance with state law, which allows us to continue to be eligible for more competitive and for state grant funding. I'm going to spend a minute on the funding piece because that is a piece that I've been working on for almost 8 years now with city government. Our community is currently in a comprehensive planning process initiated by Mayor Verga, as well as the beginning of a more comprehensive approach to capital planning. All of the initiatives that come from both of these efforts are going to need financial support. And these diverse grant opportunities offered by the state are where we find those. These grants vary in size and scope. They touch on things that are important to every single person in this room, from arts and culture, coastal resilience and sustainability, downtown revitalization, cybersecurity and technology, economic development and infrastructure. And in my time here alone, we've received a grant in each and every one of these areas and more. It's incredibly important to focus on the MassWork grants. We've received so far over $6 million in MassWorks, and we have a pending request for over $1 million. The pending requests include design money for both our wastewater pollution control facility. As you all know, as we passed that large loan order, we are looking for any dollar we can to help with that. And the other request that's pending is related to improved infrastructure in the downtown area between Grove Street and Gloucester Ave, which is much needed, as some of our counselors here know. You cannot underestimate the value of the infrastructure investments that come from these MassWork grants. We all know the city's 400 years old. Continuing to improve and build upon our infrastructure is critical. It's also the most expensive, so it cannot understate the importance of these grants. But I want to return to why we're actually here, why the state legislature passed this 3A reform, and that's the importance of increasing housing options and attainability for our residents. It's critical to the future of our city. Housing is at the heart of maintaining and improving the fabric of our community, both the family ties that make Gloucester what it is and our economic viability. Mayor Verga has repeatedly said that Gloucester is never going to build our way out of this housing crisis. And this is just one of many tools that this administration has supported, including a $1.5 million investment in the Affordable Housing Trust. And if there are folks on that here, thank you for your work as well. They're doing an incredible job vetting some proposals. Might not get the numbers right, but I think that's looking like 120 new units possibly, or supporting units, rehab or new, 90 of which are affordable. And he continues the commitment of our community development block grant into funds using both our housing rehab program and our first-time homebuyers program. This change is critical to our ability to attract and retain businesses of all types, from small locally owned businesses to large corporations like Applied Materials and Gorton's. This is the #1 thing we hear when we meet with both of those organizations, as well as all of our small businesses that are trying to attract and retain employees for service jobs in the tourism industry. And I think one of the most important things for everyone to think about too is it's also critical to maintaining the fabric of our community, which is those family ties. It allows seniors to have options to downsize and age in place. It allows young families to have a place to start and grow. And if we don't find a way to increase our housing options, the heart and soul of what Gloucester is going to change. Change is good, but including and keeping those ties that are so important to who we are is incredibly important. It's going to take all these tools to continue to make it possible for people to live here and work here and either continue to be a part of our community or become a new member of our community. And everyone is accepted here, and that is a very important part to this administration, and I know to all of you. So we hope you will support the proposal in front of you tonight, and we thank you for your time and consideration.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Cahill. So, as we had discussed, we will look for the 15 minutes from the opposition, Tracy O'Neill. And actually, before we do this, Councilor Gilman, would you like to make a motion?
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. I move to suspend Council Rules of Procedure Rule 4, Public Hearings, in order to allow communications received up until the close of business this afternoon, Tuesday, September 11th, 2024, to be read into the record and filed, and to set the close of business on Monday, September 23rd, 2024, or 72 hours prior to the continued public hearing planned for Thursday, September 26th at 6:30 PM regarding our 3A zoning amendments, and I so move.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded, and I believe that this has to be by roll call vote. Madam Clerk?
Just like to discuss it briefly. As Council Nolan said earlier, we'd like to make this as inclusive for everybody's communications. Typically, we have a very strict 72 hours before the meeting. That would have meant that the last 3 days, we wouldn't have been able to enter your records into our written comments. And we're able to do that with this. And further, because we're continuing this until the 26th, that is when we will make sure that the 72-hour timeframe is adhered to. So those two parameters are basically giving everybody here, whether you're in opposition or in support, will have a little bit of extra time to get your written communications together and submitted to the clerk's office to distribute to the counselors and to be in the public record. So.
Thank you, Counselor Gilman. So it's been moved and seconded, and now we have a roll call.
Are we voting on both of those with one vote?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Grow,
Yes.
Counselor Majota,
Yes.
Hard,
Yes.
Counselor Nolan,
Yes.
Counselor Worthley,
Yes.
Counselor Benson,
Yes.
Counselor Gilman,
Yes.
Counselor Grace,
Yes.
Counselor Gross, all right. Liaisons and- Vote is 8 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 absent.
Did you hear me say yes?
No,
Okay, yes. And I can't hear most of the counselors. I could hear Val, but I couldn't hear who seconded it.
It was
It was
Counselor
moved-
Grow.
It was moved by Counselor Gilman, seconded by Counselor Grow. I've recorded all the votes, including yours, as being in favor. So the vote is 9 in favor, 0 opposed to suspend the rules.
All right, excellent, thank you. So next up, we'll go back to Tracy O'Neill. If you'd like to have your 15 minutes, please.
Tracy O'Neill, 12 Friend Street. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me this time. I really appreciate it. I want to thank the members of the City Council and the members of the Planning Board. I know this is a lot of work. I know it's a lot of research, and I do appreciate it, although sometimes it seems like I don't, but I do. Before I get into my presentation, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. R5, I believe it was Greg Catamatori who said R5 is the backbone of 3A. R5 is the most condensed, most culturally diverse, and of the city, and it's also an environmental justice neighborhood where a lot of the zoning has taken place. And the requirement of the environmental justice neighborhood is income-based, which means we make less than $65,000 a year. And 89% of the zoning laws are being put in the R5 neighborhood, which 89% of 2,220 is 2020. Okay, and that's a lot. If it would be equitable, I know half of that needs to be spread out between the two train stations, or just one train station. Let's say half of it goes at the main train station downtown. That's 1,135. That's a lot less than 2020. So the remaining 1,135 would be divided by wards 1, 4, and 5. So it would be East Gloucester, Riverdale, Annisquam, Lanesville, and then West Gloucester and or Magnolia. That's that. Okay, so I keep getting this pop-up that I'm unable to get on the Zoom. Okay, hold on. I keep getting this pop-up. Oh, yeah, I tried to do that. I would not. I didn't want to do that either. Maybe disconnect and reconnect. Yeah. Oh. Well, I'm out of it. It's out of it all. I want to do it because I was free. I don't know, do it. Yeah. It's, yeah, sure. That's fine.
I just want to thank you for all your patience. We're just trying to work through some difficulties here to make sure that the opposition has some time to make sure that we're heard. And we have also paused the time on the 15 minutes.
No, it would be password.
I've been trying to do this all night. So I can't share my slides. Is that correct?
Does anyone else in your computer
No.
with that?
I don't. I was just notified yesterday. What if I shut it down? My computer?
Yeah.
There's something that. And then I forgot to bring my mouse, so Restart. Nothing if I'm not troubleshooting. Everything was open. I'm gonna let you do it, okay?
That's all.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just.
Look at it.
No, I know. What if I just say what I have to say, or save it for next week? Yeah, but. Set that as default. Maybe that'll work. This says it's reconnected, but it's running a number of diagnostics, so.
I don't know if you have something on here that's blocking that security.
Oh, that's why I came in early, but.
Yeah. Know how to.
do that.
Thanks, on Eastern Ave too. Hey, that's pretty good.
Bids.
Frank, you should know that is.
Where-
You should know what Frank's is.
No, so,
Right? Recess? We're in session.
so we want to be in Chrome, so.
But it's defaulting to that when I click on the link, it'll.
Well,
Let's go together. I think it's.
Now, so we're talking about marginalization. Also remember that.
thank you.
All right, if everybody could take their seats, please. We've reached time where we're unable through technical difficulties to see the actual presentation tonight. We've made every effort to try to reboot and bring forward the presentation. So at this time, I'd like to continue the time for Tracy to speak on the behalf of the opposition to as much information as she can give at this time.
Again, thank you. Thank you for working so hard on this, and thank you for your patience. Section 3A, I'm going to read it. An MBTA community shall have a zoning ordinance or bylaw that provides for at least one district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right. Provided, however, that such multifamily housing shall be without age restrictions, so no senior housing, shall be suitable for families with children. For purposes of this section, a district of reasonable size shall, one, have a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, and subject to any further limitations imposed by Section 40, Chapter 131, and Title 5 of the State Environmental Code established pursuant to Section 13 of Chapter 21A. And 2, be located not more than a half mile from commuter rail station, subway station, ferry, or terminal, or bus station. So that was paragraph A. Paragraph B says, an MBTA community that fails to comply with this section shall not be eligible for funds from 1, the Housing Choice Initiative, 2, the Local Capital Projects Fund, 3, MassWorks Infrastructure Program, and 4, the Housing Works Infrastructure Program. I was a counselor about 2 years ago, and I asked the auditor how much money we got from these grants, or these buckets of money, as I call them. We got 0 going back 10 years. I had him go back 10 years. We got 0 from the Housing Choice Initiative. We got 0 from the Local Capital Projects Fund. We got $3 million from MassWorks Infrastructure. And that was because they had to rip up a neighborhood of Trask Street to lay the pipes, et cetera, for the Halyard apartments so they could have water and electricity and all that stuff. If they didn't build the Halyard, they wouldn't have to rip up the street. We wouldn't have needed the $3 million. So in my mind, that's 0. The 4th bucket of money is the Housing Works Infrastructure Program. And it's my understanding that they have not distributed any monies from that bucket of money yet. They just established it not that long ago. So I'm reading these chapters or these paragraphs, paragraph A, paragraph B. This is paragraph B. In this subsection, paragraph B, this is the law. The 3-paragraph law does not provide for other consequence of noncompliance with the legislature's directive in subsection A. So the only consequences in this law, in the law, is that we won't get any money from these 4 buckets of money that we never got anyway. We got $3 million, but that's because they built the Halyard. So we did get $3 million, and my understanding is we got $3 million more. I don't know where that went. I'm not a counselor anymore, so I can't attend all the meetings. Okay, so this is the law, right? It's 3 paragraphs. Does not provide for other consequences of noncompliance with the legislature's directive in subsection A. Paragraph C, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, the EOHLC, in consultation with the Executive Office of Economic Development, the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, and the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, shall promulgate guidelines to determine if an MBTA community is in compliance with this section. Subsection C, I just read, gives the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities the limited authority to promulgate compliance guidelines. The legislature could have given the EOHLC regulatory authority, but it didn't. Instead, it limited the legislature who writes the laws, limited EOHLC's power to the issuance of guidelines, which have no independent legal effect. Guidelines are not regulations, and they do not carry the force of law and cannot be the basis for directives and requirements not contained in the law. Guidelines are meant to explain the provisions of a statute or regulation, and they cannot be used to impose substantive new legal requirements. An agency which seeks to make new substantive provisions going beyond what a statute specifically provides needs to be given regulatory power to do so. Although the legislature has given EOHLC regulatory power in a number of areas of the law. Hey, can you get that? Sorry, that's my 8 o'clock alarm. I walk a dog at 8 o'clock, so I apologize for the interruption. Okay, back to business. Although the legislature has given EOHLC regulatory power in a number of areas of law, the power is specific to those areas. EOHLC has not been given regulatory power to impose the directives and requirements which it seeks to impose on MBTA communities. The numerous substantive rules and directives imposed by EOHLC in the guidelines are not set out in the statute. It's not in the law and cannot be inferred from the statutory language. So you can't get an inference from the paragraphs. The 3 paragraphs don't infer what the guidelines say. If any such rule is to be effective and enforceable, it needs to be subject to a duly promulgated regulation pursuant to an appropriate legislative grant of regulatory authority. They have to be given authority by the legislature. The Administrative Procedure Act requires legally binding regulations for what DHC did, for what EOHLC, proposes in its guidelines. So that's the Administrative Procedure Act requires legally binding regulations for what EOHLC proposes. Excuse me. If an agency proposes to adopt a rule which meets the definition of a regulation, in order to adopt the rule, the agency must promulgate a regulation under the Administrative Procedures Act. The EOHLC did not promulgate a regulation under the Administrative Procedures Act. In conclusion, the EOHLC's guidelines are ineffective and unenforceable. EOHLC's compliance guidelines, for the multifamily zoning districts under Section 3A of the Zoning Act cannot be legally enforced. These guidelines are not simply explanations seeking to fill in the details or clear up an ambiguity, as previously stated. Instead, they seek to impose numerous substantive legal requirements so as to greatly expand the scope of municipal zoning and to impose a litany of specific steps which MBTA communities must take to meet their newly defined obligations. The legislature has not given EOHLC regulatory power. It could have done so, but it did not. Instead, the legislature limited EOHLC's power to guidelines. Without regulatory power, EOHLC cannot issue regulations, which it didn't. Without regulations, EOHLC cannot legally impose its requirements and directives contained in the guidelines. The conclusion is inescapable that the guidelines are legally ineffective and unenforceable. I got this information from attorney Alex Whiteside. He was a graduate of Harvard University with a degree in history before receiving his law degree at Fordham University and eventually earning a Master's of Law in Boston University. He held the position of Chief Counsel to the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development for 16 years. The Department of Housing and Community Development is now the EOHLC. So this man knows what he's talking about. And I truly appreciate his work, your work. I really do. But the state is overstepping their bounds, or the EOHLC is overstepping. And it's not legal. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tracy. And a copy of that has been sent to the council via email. So we do have a hard recording of this. Thank you very much. I believe the planning board also received. Yeah, excellent. So next up, we're going to be asking, and we can do this in two phases. There's no hand raising tonight, I'm sorry. Is that we're going to ask for people that are in favor of this to start a line and come up to the podium and speak. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak. And there's the people that are in favor, please. All right, come on up. And if you could state your name and address for the record.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
David Holden. I'm the Executive Director of the Gloucester Housing Authority with offices at 259 Washington Street. Thank you, councilors, members of the Planning Committee. The Gloucester Housing Authority Board of Commissioners voted at their August 14th, 2024 regular meeting to urge the City of Gloucester to comply with the requirements of the MBTA Communities Act and ask that the City Council adopt the proposed Section 3A zoning amendments. The Housing Authority's state-aided housing developments at Lincoln Park, Poplar Park, McPherson Park, Sheedy and Clark Buildings, and Riverdale are funded in part by operating subsidy that is provided directly to the Housing Authority by the Commonwealth. In this year's state budget, 16.7% of these local housing authority subsidies are funded by the Local Capital Projects Fund, which is among the funds under the Act, which could be withheld by the Commonwealth if the city fails to adopt these zoning amendments. As the state removed language that was included in last year's budget that protected a housing authority if its municipality failed to comply with the law. The Housing Authority estimates that it could lose anywhere between $135,000 to $630,000 annually in subsidy if these funds were withheld, which could result in severe staffing and service cuts that would directly impact the residents we serve. The community needs to understand that this program is already severely underfunded at an expense level of just under $400 a month per apartment. It is the best affordable housing deal in the state. If the state withholds any part of our subsidy, we will be endangering the health and safety of our most vulnerable citizens and make it even less likely that these vital affordable housing resources will be here for future generations. In addition, the zoning amendments being proposed would assist the Housing Authority in the future redevelopment of our federal Willowwood Gardens development on Maplewood Avenue. Believe it or not, it's been 35 years since we transferred Maplewood Gardens into Willowwood Gardens. And within the next 4 to 5 years, we need to do it again. And this is going to give us additional tools to attract funding to make major improvements and also look at pluses and minuses concerning the density and current configuration at the development. In closing, the Housing Authority respects that the decision on the adoption of these zoning requirements rests solely with the city. But our Board of Commissioners believes we would be remiss if we did not inform the city of the possible negative impact of compliance would have on the elderly, disabled, and families with children we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, we'll give a second warning when the time is up. If you don't hear the 10-second warning when the time's up, I'll raise my hand with paper just to let people know that the time is up. But thank you, David. Name and address, Barnaby.
Barnaby Prendergast, 61 Fernald Street. I am very much in support of this legislation. I would have liked to see more affordable housing opportunities included in it, but you know, as Jagger says, you don't always get what you want. I'm glad that it's clear now that there are not going to be too many units. I think the council recognizes that home rule is not an issue as an objection to this legislation. It's actually expressly written into our zoning ordinance. I'm very grateful that if we move forward with it, that we will retain the opportunity to receive grants, which, or even if they haven't been as useful to Gloucester in the past, that they might be useful in the future. I'm very happy that the legislation maintains control of height, addresses parking, and hopefully the increased housing opportunities will mean less competition for Gloucester residents who are looking for places to live. More housing means more people can find places to live. I know there are concerns about infrastructure, which are also dealt with in the guidelines. Hopefully, any large-scale developments will be paid for by the developer. And the majority of any possible development is going to be in the hands of the individual property owners. As for overcrowding, I think that, again, moving forward by allowing more capacity is actually helpful for the schools, which have seen a distinct drop in attendance over the last 20 years. Hopefully, more people living here will reduce the traffic. And this might sound counterintuitive, but there are about half the people who half the people who work in Gloucester commute here. And they're all driving down 128 and they're all going around Grant Circle and Blackburn Circle to get to their jobs. And hopefully, if more of them can live in town, that's great. Parking's an issue, but those people who are driving into work here are also parking here. Finally, I would just like to say that when going through the objections that people raise, that the objections that are not based in reality, and there will be lots of them, and objections that are based on misinformation should not play part of the decision-making process. If the world is round and or a sphere, and somebody says it's flat, we don't base decisions on the fact that they're proposing that the world is flat. Thank you.
Barnaby. Hello, please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Pamela Herndon. I live at 8 Acacia Street. I want to thank everyone who is here tonight, the City Council, the Planning Board, and the consultants who have worked on this. I don't have any arguments or any super detailed diatribe that I've prepared, but what I do want to say is that the presentation that I have heard about the proposed zoning seems very reasonable. Having 3-unit houses by right seems very reasonable to me and will be an incremental step in being able to increase our housing numbers, our inventory. I am concerned about having the right-sized houses for the population that Gloucester is now and the future population. And as I think about aging, I know that I will need a small place to live in, which probably will be one of these 3-unit places, or maybe one of the larger places like Willowwood. So I support this zoning, I support this plan, and I thank everyone for their work, and that's all.
Thank you. How are you doing tonight? If you just give your name and address for the record, please.
Judy Steiner, 29 Addison Street. I live about a block away from the commuter rail, and I am a frequent commuter on it. Not that that's relevant to here, but I want to thank everybody that's done a lot of work. Greg, you're incredible. Thank you for repeating yourself over and over and over. And I was confused. Dylan and Marjorie helped me understand some things that were there because I've heard some mischaracterization of what this project is or some ramifications of the project. I was to another meeting and it was referred to as a land grab, and it's not. Greg can explain this better than I can, but you can only sell the house. A property must be for sale by the owner. Nobody can come in and grab it. And there are the regulations for the 3 multifamily units, which avoids the high rise. I'm in support. I think they've done a lot of work. You look at the graphs, and that's what Jane helped me understand, is when I said I live in the 2 blocks away, I'm not part of this zoning. I'm already zoned there. So the zoning for the downtown area has been pushed further away from the train station because it's already condensed there. There is some argument about a 50-50, which we can't do. As you know, West Gloucester is wetlands. You ever driven around there? Go ahead, it's beautiful. But we only can work with what we have. So I think they've done a phenomenal job at looking at all of this possible scenarios and tweaking things as much as they could to please everybody. And what else? So, isn't it lovely when you forget what you wanted to say? But I think that's about it. Oh, there was a complaint about a $3 million grant to Halyard. That the only reason we got it was to build Halyard. $3 million is $3 million that came into our community, regardless if it didn't get spent the way you wanted it to. Again, I'm in support of this project. I think they've done a phenomenal job, and it'll be up to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Next, if you can give me the address for the record, please.
Sure. Debbie Frontiero, 216 Washington Street. As you can tell, I'm one of those senior citizens and live in a single family house on a small lot. Would I love the opportunity to be able to do something with that property that might make it possible for my grandchildren to stay here in town? I would love it. I see this law as giving individual homeowners more rights and more freedom to be able to incorporate more housing into our city. I wish it were bolder. I'm one for taking bold actions. I understand that it can't be. I'm absolutely in support of it now. My family settled in Gloucester in the 1620s, and we have lived here continuously since then. My children own homes, some of them here, some of them in other communities. My grandchildren would love to be able to stay here in this community and make it, I don't even know how many generations it is, I can't count down, but it would be a real shame if our city got to the point where zoning kept another generation of families like mine from being able to stay in the place they've loved for 400 years. Thank you. I thank you for all your work. It's been incredible.
Excellent. Thank you, Debbie. Next, if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Turn that on.
My name's Scott Richardson, 112 Magnolia Ave. And I don't really have anything prepared to say, but I just wanted to voice my support for this 3A proposal. Clearly, housing is a major issue in Gloucester, and we need more housing, especially affordable housing, but we certainly need more housing in general. And so, yeah, that's all I really have to say. And thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. And Sonny, if you could just give us your name and address for the record.
So Sonny Robinson, 20 Harvard Street, and I welcome the opportunity to come before you tonight in support of this proposal. I think that the proposal is reasonable, modest, well thought out, and the result of many, many people listening to many, many people and figuring out how to make it all work. I live on Harvard Street, as you may know, is right on the edge of the Centennial area subzone. And that is very much why I am in support of the other opportunities moving forward with this. When I think about my own street, it is as if my own street, Harvard Street and Morton Place, is already a multifamily overlay district. Almost every house on my street was built as a one-family house, but at least half of those houses are now at least two-family houses or three-family houses. So my little lovely cul-de-sac neighborhood demonstrates even now how workable such a proposal is. Even though, in fact, many of the houses on my street will not be eligible for doing anything with this overlay zoning because they are less than 4,000 square feet. So that limitation, I think, is a very good limitation that in fact keeps the potential development in the hands of current homeowners to move their homes from one family to two family or two family to three family. But in fact, while creating that opportunity does not create a boondoggle that in fact would bring in lots of developers trying to buy up those properties, and in fact creates opportunities for homeowners without greatly changing the neighborhood. I'm delighted that included in the proposal is the Maplewood Avenue and the Schoolhouse Road area. As many of you know, I've advocated for both deed restricted affordable housing and just affordable housing in general. And I hope that with those two parcels built in, we can move forward quickly and not only increase the multifamily housing, but increase multifamily housing that in fact is deed restricted. I think it is important that all of the dimensional requirements you all have considered so carefully, and they still allow for not only dimensional requirement review, but the input in terms of parking and infrastructure and public health, so that those opportunities to make sure that housing is appropriate and fits in our community are very much there. I think we face a big challenge, however, in terms of how to somehow incentivize restricting, let me finish my sentence, restricting the rents so that they are actually affordable to the Gloucester community. I hope we can meet that big challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonny. Deanna Fay, if you just give us your name and address for the record, please.
Deanna Fay, 3 Barbary Lane, Gloucester. So I'm here to present to you the petition that Housing for All Gloucester put forward, collecting signatures throughout the community over the summer. And the petition was in support of the efforts for the 3A compliance and for a meaningful zoning process and planning. I think you've accomplished that. I think that I can speak for the signers here and for our group to say that we support the plan and that the process was indeed very thoughtful, and a lot of care went into making sure that voices were heard, that the challenges were met around the dimension technology, constraints and all of the other challenges. I listened to many of the planning board meetings, and I have no idea what everything was talked about. It was complicated. So I commend you for dealing with that all so very carefully and thoughtfully. So I want to submit this as for the record, and just say thank you again for all of the effort that you put into this, and I hope it passes. Thank you. What?
12?
Oh.
And Ruth, if you just give us your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Ruth Pino. I live at 82 Wheeler Street, which is in Riverdale, Ward 4. So I don't live in either one of the neighborhoods that you are looking at, but I'm very familiar with both of them. And I want you to remember to tell everyone in the audience and in the public what the delta is, what the number is that's required, and what the number we already have. I am in support of you doing whatever it takes to reform zoning in Gloucester by reopening the Railroad Avenue discussion as an example, and to reopen conversations around the zoning amendments provided by the planning board 2 years ago, which some of you said no to. That would cover all the districts in Gloucester. So for those of you who are talking about, or those in the audience talking about that, let's get this in other wards, that's the way to do it. Reform our zoning ordinance in general, and it'll go a long way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Chris, if you just give your name and address for the record, please.
Chris McCarthy, 166 Bray Street in Gloucester. Thanks for all your hard work. I know this has been on the table for a long time. Nobody's been working on it really hard. I'm in favor of any zoning changes that help bring more housing to the market. I've been for the last probably 30 years, 35 years building mostly, almost exclusively single-family homes. A lot of first-time home buyers, a lot of people retiring. And all I see coming into town now is people just finished a house for a doctor, for a lawyer, and I see our kids getting out of college, out of high school, having to move out of town. I think whatever we can do to get more housing here, market rate housing. I don't plan on doing multifamily. I'm helping with a project, permit one, but I don't build multifamily. I just really just build single family, and if someone wants a two-family, a brother and a sister, I'll assist them and help them. But I think whatever we can do to help to build more, we'll keep our kids here, and we'll keep some of our aging, parents and grandparents here. It's crazy that we're opposing trying to allow more, zoning for more housing. I'm in favor of this to go through, and I, like anytime there's been a big zoning change, there's just a very small little chug of additional housing units. It's going to take a long, long time to fill up the units that could potentially be in Gloucester with this change, but it's going to take a very long time, and it's not going to happen like people try to scare other people into. I think it's a good idea, and thanks for your hard work.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Is there anybody else in the actual physical audience that would like to speak in favor? If they could come up, please. Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to ask if anybody that would like to speak in opposition to start forming a line by the dais. All right, no, hold on one second. So just so everybody understands, it is 3 minutes per person. Grace will give a 10-second warning. And when your 3 minutes is up, I'll read papers and we can go from there. If you could just kindly start by stating your name and address for the record, please.
Cynthia Bierley, 46 Muscle Point Road. And I appreciate and don't disagree with just about anything anyone has said. And if you think that anything I'm saying is misinformation, I would like to know what it is. We request that Gloucester reject the MBTA zoning plan. Let us ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this legislation? If the answer is to seek more housing alternatives and encourage public transportation, that makes sense. I submit that there are better and cheaper ways to achieve the same result. The reasons to reject the plan are, it is a misguided attempt at government control of natural human migration. It is an example of government overreach in violation of the home rule concept. It will be expensive, and there are better ways. This is a population map of Massachusetts, with the reddish areas being most populated. Why are we trying to squeeze more people into the most densely populated part of the state? Why not encourage industry, jobs, housing, and transportation further west where land is more plentiful and cheaper? As far as the government withholding grant money if we don't vote the way the state wants us to, that is a threat. That grant money is our tax dollars. They are threatening to withhold our tax dollars from us, and they will sue us if we don't vote the way the state wants. The state is suing the town of Milton for a local election results, and we, the taxpayers, are paying for the lawsuit. If 50 acres of Gloucester becomes a transit overlay district, the state government shall forever have veto power over any structural change in that area. Gloucester Harbor is already a transit overlay district as a designated port area. And the TOD injects a whole new level of bureaucracy into every single property change. In Massachusetts, there are 10 designated ports, and they are overseen by the Office of Coastal Zone Management. The Office of Coastal Zone Management now has 5 regional offices and a multi-million-dollar budget to ensure that each of the 10 ports follows all the rules. Why do we need to pay someone else to make sure we follow the rules? Let us do our own zoning. How many millions of your tax dollars will it take to ensure MBTA zoning compliance in 177 communities? If we really want to improve housing stock, let us make use of our city-owned land. Instead of selling off parcels to the highest bidder, let us encourage local designers, contractors, and suppliers to build efficient, rentable units. Let us do our own zoning. In summary, we ask that Gloucester join with other communities and reject this big government convoluted waste of tax dollars.
Cynthia. Next, if you could just state your name and address for the record and speak into the mic, please.
Shut up. My name is Pam Kaminsky. I live at 427 Washington Street. And I want to thank you all for the privilege to be able to speak. And I believe that we all feel the same way tonight. Thank you. My fellow concerned citizens, counselors, and planning board members. As a North Shore historic preservationist for 35 years, I consider the entirety of Rockport and Gloucester an historic district. The fragile ecosystem of marine and bird migrations, the oldest fishing ports and art colonies in the United States, and a 400-year-old rich culture is a very rare jewel. Gloucester's archaic horsepath windy roads are often gridlocked. Our water treatment is substandard. We have one bridge and a 2-lane causeway as egresses. Recently, it took me 14 months to get my electrical meter changed. And the good folks at the Public Works were kindly explained to me that there were only 2 gentlemen to service 13,000 homes. Okay, What are you going to do about it? I totally understand. Your consultants have provided us with Legos, but no evacuation plan or financial analysis of your proposed influx of 2,270 more units. Of course, we all desire more affordable housing, but you have repeatedly informed us that this proposed zoning change is neither to provide elderly or low-income housing, nor would it benefit current residents to age in place directly, perhaps indirectly, but that's not what I think people really need. You remind us that Gloucester could lose grant funding if we do not comply, but your taxpayer-funded consultants have never presented to the taxpayers a cost analysis of grant money in jeopardy versus the tsunami of inevitable infrastructure upgrades and lifestyle compromises. Protect, please protect our medieval fishing villages from state overreach with home rule. Home rule empowers towns and cities with sovereign rights to act on behalf of their citizens. Home rule was enacted in Massachusetts, fought long and hard, by the way, in 1966 to protect communities against corporate interests and land grabbers. Before you lies a vote that has grave and irreparable consequences. There are 30 TOD communities now that have joined a class action lawsuit against the state challenging the constitutionality of this law. Protect and preserve Gloucester's cultural heritage. Vote no.
Thank you.
Hi Patty, how you doing tonight? If you just give your name and address for the record, please.
Patty Anwell, 14 Middle Square. Is this working? Probably don't even need it. Anyway. Number one, I want to ask everybody here, right here, where do you live? Do you live in these zones? How many? Can you raise your hand? 1, 2, 3. Okay. 4. Very good. Okay. As Ward 2 is going to be discriminated against the most with 3A, is it a law? Is it a proposal? Is it a mandate? Is it guidelines? We don't know. But anyway, Dylan Benson was quoted in the Gloucester Daily Times recently. He has heard from residents in his ward who don't like the law. He said he has also heard from others about the need to comply and the consequences for the city if it fails to do so. This is a very tough decision for me, he said, because I have been hearing from constituents that really are not wanting us to comply. From just these 3 sentences, a resident would think Councilor Benson would not vote for a mandate that would affect each and every one of his constituents, perhaps in a negative manner. I think too many of us really don't understand this mandate or can vision the effects it will have on our city as a whole. Hamilton has already pushed its vote to April 2025, and we should do the same. We're not prepared. As in all these meetings still, I've been doing it for 3 years. I still don't know what's going on. And I would love to ask all you guys a question if I really knew what to even say. Are we willing to give up our rights as a city to the state? The state will dictate what our city will look like in years to come. Is this what we want to leave for future generations? No say in how this city will look like years from now? This will not provide affordable housing, as we all have been talking about. This will not fix our housing problem. This will not afford us all quality of life. This will overburden our aging infrastructure, our open spaces. We only have 2 left in our inner city, and they are the Emerald Forest and Burnham's Field. It's all we have left. It's going to impact our schools, our emergency responders, putting our community at risk. Let's stand up to the state and say, no, we will not comply. And I want to look at that, Bill, not for tomorrow alone, but for today as well. So many people say that. We need to do this. I live right at the train. You probably saw me yawning a little bit because I'm up at 5:30 and I have to go to bed at 10 or whatever when the train lets me go to bed. I am right there. My china cabinet shakes when the train comes. I am very close. I am also one of the people, friends of Emerald Forest, that saved the wetland that was there. I have to continuously email Greg and say, is the Emerald Forest still okay? Are you going to take that? And all we know is about Burns Field. Dylan just got, hopefully, a handicap swing. I've been working since 2022 trying to get Burnham's Field in some form of fashion, some safe place. A gate to be put up, a handicap swing, a slide to be fixed that could cut a kid's leg. This is what the things we need to focus on, put our money towards, please. Say no to this. No, we will not comply. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
Yeah, it's still working.
Thank you very much. Beverly,
Just give us your name and address for the record, please.
Beverly Johnson, 50 Summer Street. I think all of you counselors got a letter from me this week, but I'd like to add to it maybe the next time again too. In 1981, I moved to Gloucester. I rented a home and within a year and a half, they sold it. And then I rented another home and within a year, they sold it. And then I moved into another place, and then I moved into another place, and it flooded. And then the Mother's Day flood of 2006, I was in a flooded basement, and I had to move. So I had garnered some money and bought myself a condo, and I've been in there since '06. While I lived in apartments and rentals, there was always an uncertainty. Will my rent be raised? Will they sell the house again? When I finally got my own place, I knew I could not lose my home unless I chose to leave it or I failed to meet my obligations by not paying for and maintaining it. I had sovereignty over my home. I could buy a dog, a cat, a lizard, and I could do anything I wanted to within reason on the outside of my home or inside. So my question is about sovereignty. Which one of you in this room who own your own home would exchange the sovereignty of your home ownership or your hopes for a future home ownership if you don't own a home for a rental with the uncertainty of a landlord's rental whims? Who in this room would agree to give up their ownership sovereignty, your decision for your yard and home interior for the promise by the Gloucester City Council to lower your taxes? What if they told you that your taxes would be lowered? You guys, if you told somebody their taxes would be lowered to some unspecified amount if you gave up your rights? What if they said that if you agreed to their rule over your Ponderosa, they now would have the right to determine who would live in your house going forward? What if by agreeing to take a tax break in exchange for your home zoning, you were then required to share your unused bedrooms with people in need of housing? Would any of you take the cash for the uncertainty of the city's government's whims over your current rights to control how and with whom you live? Would the lowering of your taxes really entice you to give up your personal home rule rights, your personal sovereignty over your dwelling you had worked and paid for with your sacrifice and savings? If any of you would be willing to take the cash for that deal, you could contact the governor because she has people she can fill your empty rooms with. I would just say that the government does not always keep promises. In the housing 1 year ago in August.
You're at time.
Time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly.
It was a good story though, the rest of it.
You can submit it, Beverly.
Julianne McKenney.
Hold on one second. Beverly, if you want to submit that to the clerk, we can put that in record for the entirety. Sorry about that. And if you could just give us your name and address for the record, please.
Julianne McKenney, 1097A Washington Street. Thank you for your service to the City of Gloucester. It has been written, the Home Rule Amendment, Article 89, was adopted to reaffirm the customary and traditional liberties of the people with respect to the conduct of their local government and to grant and confirm to the people of every city and town the right of self-government in local matters. Home Rule is an important provision that helps assure the liberty of the people, The entire nature of checks and balances is that liberty is secure when power is divided, not concentrated. Home rule is also a simple recognition that local governments are best equipped to handle local problems. Not only is local government smaller and more responsive to the needs of its citizens, but it is nimble and better equipped to handle local issues. We do not want to be stuck with one-size-fits-all solutions. Gloucester is unique. It seems to me residents in favor of 3A are not fully aware of the implications. In spite of the proclamations that our city has been informed of 3A, most citizens are not even aware of its existence. A vote for 3A will negate the home rule law. It's designated, a vote for 3A will negate the home rule law in designated parcels of city zoning. The changing of our zoning laws only comes with a vote from City Council. As it stands, we are still operating under home rule. Please vote no on 3A. As many have seen in the news, the town of Milton overturned a town meeting referendum that initially brought Milton into compliance with 3A. The citizens are fighting for their voices to be heard. In neighboring Rockport, a concerned citizen is suing the state and a class action lawsuit is active. To the best of my knowledge, the status of the class action lawsuit, the first submittal of cities and towns joining the Rockport suit, forming a class action suit. Rockport, Marblehead, Rowley, Malden, Millbury, Wakefield, Wayland, Danvers, Hamilton, Gloucester, Winthrop. Second submittal, August 1st, 2024. Needham, Sudbury, Marshfield, Acton, Newton, Duxbury, Maynard, Plymouth, Hanson. Towns that submitted required paperwork that requires processing and should be submitted to the court shortly. Manchester, Wenham, Halifax, Westford, Chelmsford, Reading. Towns working on required paperwork and will most likely be joining the class action lawsuit: North Reading, Lexington, Winchester, Franklin, Belmont, among others. There is another way. Please represent the majority of the people and save our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Hey, you know the rule.
Saltanat Berzikeva, 33 Middle Street. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. At the March 25th workshop, the public was asked to use Legos to pinpoint where they think more housing was appropriate. The turnout was huge, and we all did what we were asked to do, despite the calls by some of the members of the public to have a discussion rather than being dictated to play with Legos. The pictures we took of each of the maps where the public was asked to place the Legos showed they were all over Gloucester, not just in one area. However, at a later meeting, we were told participants favored downtown rezoning or something along those lines, contradicting the evidence of the pictures of the Legos were placed. Every subsequent meeting was different from the meeting before, and it was confusing to know how the plans came about and where the input of the public was incorporated. At one meeting, the planning board and MBTA consultant presented a plan to the downtown area for the downtown area near the train station. At that meeting, the public was told that it was just an example of how we could rezone to comply with the mandate. A meeting after that, we were presented with different scenarios, primarily focused on, again, just the downtown area. And in the end, a version of these plans turned from an example to an actual plan. The most recent plan is far from what the public asked for. The folks at the planning department admitted mistakes with the March workshop with the Legos. That's not the public's fault. If you make a mistake, then start the process again and do better. But it is disingenuous to claim that the plan that will be going before the City Council's vote fully reflects the public opinion and feedback. Most of those who know about the MBTA mandate do not support it. Most of the residents in wards 2 and 3, the wards that will have about 90% of the rezoning to comply with the mandate, have no clue about the mandate or any of these meetings. At the June public forum, the members of the public, including myself, asked you to do better outreach and that equity and burden sharing must be at the center of your decision-making, something that was missing in Greg's presentation earlier on what people asked. None of that happened. We see the same old familiar faces. I am still one of the minorities. No new people I see at any of the meetings. So what did you do to do better to inform people? Nothing. Equity and burden sharing was thrown out of the window. The consultant himself said in almost every presentation that beyond the 2 train station, a minimum contiguous district size could account for 25% of rezoning. None of that happened, but all the burden went to Ward 2 and 3. Just like how public concerns and opposition against the monstrous 20 Main Street development 8 inches behind my property are being ignored, with some planning board members openly praising the developer's lawyer and telling her to ignore the people who disagree with her. Not only you're belittling public feedback, but also trying to push your plan under the guise of public support. This is your plan, so don't sell it in the name of the public. Thank you.
Alton on. How are you doing tonight? If you just give your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, everyone. Clayton Sauve, 28 Fort Square. I'm here to talk about a couple of numbers I haven't heard mentioned in this plan. One number that was mentioned was that we're looking to create 2,300 roughly new family-friendly units. 2,300 units is likely going to bring in 2,300 additional students in the school system. The school system now roughly has about 2,300 students and costs $50 million. So it would stand to reason that the school budget is going to double with this addition of new tuitions. Of that $50 million, 2,300 units will bring in about $10 million in taxes. So there's going to be a $40 million deficit every year that the city is going to have to deal with to cover these tuitions. I haven't heard anyone say how the city is going to get that money. I haven't heard Greg mention it or anyone else for that matter. So I wonder how that is going to be done. I think that also the influx of doubling the school system is going to be very bad for the schools. It's going to be a burden that is going to degrade the performance of the schools, let alone the scramble for all that money the city is going to need every year. I think this plan has the potential to wreck the finances of the city and wreck the schools. So I would urge you all to vote no on this measure. Thank you.
Ricky Clayton. How are you doing tonight? You just give your name and address for the record, please.
Robert White, 485 Washington. Thank you for the opportunity to address the council. 3A, while intended to streamline zoning and control growth, has significant implications for our infrastructure and emergency preparedness, particularly in Gloucester. First and foremost, let us address the strain of Section 3A places on our infrastructure. The legislation's rigid zoning requirements and focuses on growth without considering local infrastructure and has led to an overburdened system. In Gloucester, where infrastructure is already stretched thin, the increased development allowed under Section 3A exacerbates these challenges. As our population grows, so does the demand on our roads, utilities, and emergency services. Gloucester, with its historic streets and limited roadways, is struggling to keep up with the influx of new residents and businesses. Our roads are becoming more congested and public services are becoming increasingly strained, making it difficult to maintain the quality of life we value in our community. Beyond the day-to-day strain on infrastructure, there is critical safety concerns that cannot be overlooked. Emergency evacuation. Gloucester is a coastal community with unique geographical challenges and only 2 bridges. In the event of natural disaster or emergency, our ability to evacuate residents quickly and safely is paramount. However, 3A's promotion of high-density development without adequate consideration for emergency planning increases the risk of severe overcrowding. A densely populated area with limited evacuation routes can turn a manageable situation into a crisis. Increased density without corresponding infrastructure improvements compromises our ability to evacuate efficiently in the event of an emergency. Our evacuation routes are already limited, and adding more residents exacerbates the risk of gridlock and delays. We need to recognize that growth must be balanced with infrastructure capacity and emergency preparedness. 3A's current approach does not account for these critical factors, placing our community at risk. We need to advocate for zoning policies that consider the full impact of development on infrastructure. Investments in infrastructure keep pace with the development. This means not only expanding roadways and utilities, but also ensuring our emergency services and plans to evacuate are robust and capable of handling increased demand. We must push for legislation that supports responsible growth, taking into account the unique needs of the coastal and historically dense community. In light of these concerns and imperative, we call for reform on 3A. We need to advocate for a legislative approach that allows for growth while ensuring that infrastructure and our emergency preparedness are not compromised. In conclusion, 3A has significant drawbacks when it comes to infrastructure strain and emergency preparedness. Our community is facing increasing challenges that require us to advocate for smarter, more considerate growth policies. Let me wrap up. Opposing 3A is not opposing housing development in Gloucester. We need that, but not this way.
Thank you, Robert. And if you could just state your name and record for the address.
Pamela Walters White, 485 Washington Street. I just want to start, as I think all that are opposed would say, that opposition is not disrespect towards city councilors, planning board members, or consultants, or the mayor, and the hard work that you have all done. And with that said, I proceed with my reason for opposition. So thank you again for the opportunity to voice my concerns on this issue of great importance. Massachusetts 40, Section 3A is designed to standardize zoning across the state, threatens our city's autonomy, and undermines our ability to make decisions that best suit our unique needs. Today, I want to emphasize why protecting our local sovereignty is crucial and why we must stand against this overreaching law. Our city is not just a dot on the map. It's a community with its own character, challenges, and opportunities. Gloucester's strength lies in our ability to tailor policies and regulations to our specific needs. Massachusetts 40A, Section 3A, with its blanket approach to zoning, strips us of that control. By mandating zoning, 3A disregards the local context and undermines Gloucester's ability to govern its zoning effectively. A number of towns have opposed 3A. You heard the list that's joined the class action suit, including Milton. Milton's town manager, a vocal critic of Section 3A, aptly summarizes this concern. State mandates that override local decision-making can erode the unique qualities of a community. Local officials and residents are in the best position to understand and address their own needs, rather than having a one-size-fits-all solution imposed upon them. This sentiment is not just true for Milton, it resonates deeply with Gloucester's own experiences and challenges. Gloucester has its own set of unique needs and priorities that are not always compatible with statewide mandates. Our historic infrastructure, coastal geography, and community values all play a role in how we should approach zoning and development. Section 3A's uniform standards may work for some areas, but they fail to account for our local context. For instance, our coastal environment requires special considerations for development and emergency planning that a generic state mandate simply cannot address. Local control allows us to implement zoning regulations that protect our heritage while accommodating responsible growth. Section 3A threatens to undermine this delicate balance, risking negative impacts on our community's character and resilience. Sovereignty is the cornerstone of effective local governance. It ensures that communities like Gloucester have the authority to make decisions that reflect their unique needs and priorities. When state mandates override this authority, it diminishes our ability to respond to local issues and challenges effectively. Can I just read my conclusion? In conclusion, Massachusetts 48 Section 3A poses a significant threat to our local sovereignty and our ability to manage Gloucester's growth and development in a way that best suits our needs. And I urge Gloucester's mayor and city councilors not to comply in an effort to protect our right to self-governance and ensure that decisions affecting our city are made within the local context in mind. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You could just state your name and address for the record, please.
Wendy Wyman, 351 Concord Street. So the job before us as residents of Gloucester and you as council people are to weigh the pros and cons of what's before us, because it's very important, the consequences of it. And in this case, what does Gloucester gain by voting yes on 3A? And what does Gloucester lose? Who gains and who loses? First of all, we know that we will lose home rule, the right to determine our own zoning laws. This has been said so many times. Once we give it up, there's no going back. The people who live here, in some cases for generations, know the community best. They won't be the decision makers. The people who know the strengths, the character, and uniqueness of Gloucester will not be making the decisions about how this city is developed. The ones who know about the long waits at the bridge, the summer traffic, the low water pressure, the odor from the sewage treatment plant, the search for a parking place, won't be making the decisions. The police, EMTs, hospital workers, school teachers, and all those who support our community won't be making the decisions. If you as a counselor are being pressured by state politicians who promise and threaten, remember that speaking for the people who elected you is the right thing to do. I'm not saying it's easy to go against the grain. I'm sure you will feel great pressure. Maybe you'll feel shunned or made to feel short-sighted and uninformed, not as clever as the rest. But voting for what you really believe to be best for Gloucester and its citizens requires strength, and that comes with the position that you hold. We need you to stand up for us. I know there are many different points of views, and I know everyone wants more housing, especially for our children and grandchildren. There's no doubt about it, but in a city with so many talented, creative people with vision, I would rather throw my hat in with them and their ability to move us in the right direction rather than trusting in government with its long history of waste, empty promises, and self-serving agendas. Let's stay free. Please vote no on A3. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. If I could just get your name and address for the record, sir?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jeff Lobel, 80 Prospect Street.
Could you repeat that again? We couldn't hear you.
Jeff Lobel, 80 Prospect Street. Well, you know, I love a good PowerPoint presentation, and I want to thank everybody. I know there's a lot of work that's been done cranking out the numbers. And, you know, what I found in this presentation tonight is that, you know, there was a lot of information about, you know, how we have to do it, you know, how high the buildings have to be and where we're going to put the housing, but nowhere, you know, from a reasonability standpoint, did I see, you know, any financial analysis, you know, why are we doing this? I mean, you know, nobody argues of that. We need housing here. I know lots of people who have been looking for a place to live, can't afford it. Real estate prices are high. All that is, you know, no one's going to argue about, you know, housing is an issue. But this seems to me like, you know, this is how we're going to do it. It's a fait accompli because it's a money grab. You know, how much money, and I didn't hear anything about, you know, well, how much money are we going to forego if we don't do this? What do we give up? You know, there hasn't been any, I don't see a risk assessment. You know, I've only seen this is the upside, you know, and a lot of it was extremely amorphous. You know, it was a PowerPoint presentation, and I've done a lot of those. So I think the due diligence that was presented tonight uh, was really below par. And if you're going to make a decision on why you're going to do this, because this is a mandate or this, and I don't know if this is a legitimate mandate or whatever, but we got to really evaluate, why we're doing this, and is this the right way to do something? Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. How you doing tonight? If you could just give us your name and address for the record, please. You got to turn the mic on, please, and repeat that.
Hear me now? Bob Gutman, 33 Maplewood Avenue, otherwise known as the Gloucester Mill. I'm not sure I disagree with anything that's been said here today, including the ones that spoke for the proposal. There's only one problem. I think you need to haul in here the people that voted for this law and ask them what, because for openers, you heard the planning board presentation. We haven't been told the shortfall, the current amendment before the board, we don't know how much of the 2,500 vacancy it covers. You're going to have a shortfall. We don't know the number. You may have a skyscraper in front of somebody's window. We may lose the supermarket. Who knows? Who knows? Somebody voted for this law without communicating with the local officials. That's clear. This is 9/11. We better remember it. I came to New England and chose to stay here because I love the New England Reserve and TAC. But there was another time when we weren't so tactful. I actually called somebody and happened to be speaking to somebody in Great Britain. I said, "You want the colonies back?" There's one word that's on it. The English language doesn't begin to describe what's going on here now. But there is a word that can begin to start you thinking, and that word is blackmail. Why did our own representatives do this? Get them in here and let them figure out how they're going to fix it. Make it their problem, not ours.
Thank you, Bob. Is there anybody else in the audience present physically that would like to make any comments tonight? All right. At this point, I would like to make a motion to have a 3-minute recess. Second, and move, we're asked to go for a 5-minute. Yes. All right. All right. So we're going to do a 3 or 5? 3. 3. 3. All right. 3-minute recess. And this will be a roll call vote, please.
Counselor Grow,
Aye.
Counselor Majota,
Aye.
Counselor Memhard,
Aye.
Counselor Nolan,
Aye.
Counselor Worthley,
Aye.
Counselor Benson,
Aye.
Counselor Gilman,
Aye.
Counselor Grace,
Aye.
Counselor Gross.
Aye.
The motion to take a 3-minute recess at 9:08 passes 9 in favor, 0 opposed.
All right. At this point, we're going to have a recess. Rick, do you have any procedures for recess on the planning board? Would you like to do that, or?
I move that the planning board takes a 3-minute recess.
Second?
Aye.
Aye.
We had a presentation. So the
When did the housing production and get all these things to kill themselves in reservation? Or that already? What happened to 3A everybody there years ago? Two and three family by right. Across the city. How many homes in this summer? Size. I saw that. I think that's the KPN. That's what they like. Oh, yeah. It always lasts long. But a quick question, yeah. If we'd been successful, you, me, and Val, and had gotten 3 or 4 more votes 3 years ago for 2 and 3 family by right. Right, okay.
Yeah.
So, and that was part of the housing production plan that was cast by the John Bell administration.
Yes.
In 1980.
And refined. And perspective is missing.
If only he had voted for 2 and 3 family by right and have waived notification of neighbors, that was for all.
I'm okay with waiving that without giving notification of construction.
Thank you. It's close. It's close.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm back within 3 minutes. Jason, we need to have a rebuttal.
Thank you. I'm processing for Switzerland.
I'm back. What's that? You say, Jason?
like to get moving.
Oh, I know.
Six, 88?
No, 2001 to 2005. I was,
That's
I-
historical
two-
perspective.
2001 to 2007. But we wouldn't be in compliance because what's on the ground doesn't count.
Owning compliance. Good. Right? I was in compliance throughout the whole city.
We're in a different number, so we need to hit this number because basically. Right? Consequences. By the way, I came back in 3 minutes.
Sorry. If everybody could take their seats again, please.
Where are you? There you go. Try that with the traffic cop.
I move that the planning board ends the recess.
And the city council is back on call.
Do you have a second?
If we could have quiet in the hall, please.
Meeting back. Back to order.
All right, so at this point, we are going to be going to online calls and we're going to be taking them as the hands are raised. Our city clerk will bring them in. It's not going to be a for, support, or opposed. It's going to be whoever wants to speak. It's hard to regulate by hand raised where people want to be. So it's going to be a little out of order, but the same rules do apply. It's 3 minutes and there'll be a 10-second warning, and then I'll raise my hand with some papers to let you know your 3 minutes is up. And again, please state your name and your address for the record, and let's continue on. Thank you all.
I'm pulling in Joel Plaza.
Hi, guys. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. If I come in garbled, let me know and I'll join on my phone. My name is Joel Favaza. I live at 28 Middle Street, and I am speaking in favor of this proposed ordinance. And I'm not speaking in favor because I think it's going to actually help create additional housing or streamline a process that's in place, but I'm speaking in favor because I'm a local permitting attorney, and I think I'm going to financially benefit greatly from this. Now, don't get me wrong, I make a decent living now helping people deal with the already too difficult process of permitting common sense residential development in Gloucester, but I have 4 kids, and I already know at least one is going to need braces, so this proposed ordinance is really going to help me out. The people it won't help are those looking to add units of housing easily to their property or those looking for a unit to live in. But again, for me and the other lawyers who practice in front of the zoning board, this is going to be great. For example, the downtown station area includes streets full of houses that don't comply with R5 requirements and won't comply with the MFOD. For example, Liberty Street, almost none, if not actually none, of those houses meet the side setback requirement. Is someone not talking over me? Anyway, so Liberty Street, almost none of those houses meet the side yard setback requirement, and some that might just hit the side yard setback are not 15 feet back from the street, nor further from the street than the houses to the left and to the right. So those people will still need to go to the ZBA to add units. But now they'll have to comply with design control elements like roof pitch requirements that don't presently exist, or new height variances, which are harder to obtain than our existing height special permits, which means I get to charge more. A similar analysis and result can be found throughout the proposed downtown station area. For example, you guys elected to include the chunk of Centennial Avenue where the majority of the lots have less than 2,000 square feet of lot area. and the houses violate front and side yard setbacks and have no driveways. So the MFOD provides no relief or opportunities whatsoever over there, just additional headache by layering an overlay district over the R5. The West Gloucester Station area provides similar economic opportunities for people like me that make more money when regulations are more complicated. For example, the MFOD is proposed for the Clearview and Lindale Avenue areas. Well, good luck finding any parcels that have the required 65 feet of frontage and a house 20 feet back from the street out there. Plus, right now, if I want to permit tandem parking for a 3-family for a client, I can take care of that while I'm already at the zoning board getting dimensional relief. But if this ordinance passes, my clients might be required to send me to both the zoning board for dimensional relief and then the planning board to authorize tandem parking through site plan review. You've basically doubled my fee for the same project. And to those who may be speaking in opposition tonight because they're afraid of overdevelopment stemming from this ordinance, I urge you to reconsider your position. If you don't want a lot of new housing units to be easily built, this ordinance is a gift to you as well. So I'm almost at my time, so I'll end by thanking everyone for the hard work. I know many of you tried to, advocate for an ordinance that would address our housing crisis in a meaningful way, but you can't win them all. And on this one instead, the lawyers are going to win. And that's really sweet. I owe you guys one, and I hope you have a great night. I certainly am. Good luck.
Thank you, Joel.
Bringing in Linda McCarriston.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Linda, if you could just give us your name and address for the
Thank
record,
you.
please.
I'm Linda McCarriston and I live at 16 Quarry Street. And I have something in my mouth that in a poor location. I've really appreciated the comments and concerns that people have been expressing as they have a chance to speak to the planning board and the council. And I think that what Tracy presented from Attorney Whitehead, who was for 16 years in the position before it was changed to livable communities. I have heard that explanation before from a lawyer, a real estate lawyer, that there is no law that has come out of the Housing Livable Communities group because they're not warranted to create a law. And anyway, what Tracy laid out there is true, and what you all are going to do with it remains to be seen. But it's a grenade, and the pin has not yet been pulled, but the pin could be pulled by any number of people at any time. I would like to say mostly that what I have felt from the beginning on this is, what we've been told to do is not fix Gloucester or make Gloucester better for us or get what we want for Gloucester in terms of housing, because what we've been asking for is housing that people who work and live in Gloucester or want to, live, let's say, with only 2 roommates would be able to do so. And that has not been a concern, because what we've been doing, remember, is we have been solving the state's housing problem. We're part of the state's housing problem. We have single family houses. We have been part of the racism that has kept people of color from having homes. And we're going to get rid of our single family housing. And we're going to be part of the solution for the state. I just found out a couple of days ago about a project. No. I've been speaking for 3 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, I was
Time.
going to refer to the purposes clause, but I won't do that.
We have time. Thank you, Linda.
Did we have time, did you say?
Oh, you've met your time. I'm sorry.
we have time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Is there
you.
anybody else online that would like to make any comments tonight?
I'm bringing in Cynthia Kraling.
How you doing, Cynthia? Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
We can. If you could just give your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Cynthia Kryling. I'm on Keystone Road in West Gloucester. I am asking for a risk assessment to be made available to the public. I'm not hearing anything about the actual cost, including the cost to our schools or for services for this number of additional residents in Gloucester. And I understand the number would be 10,000 plus. I'm not hearing what the total cost of services will be for that number of people. Secondly, I'd like to advocate that the vote on this be held until after the decision of the Supreme Judicial Court regarding the Milton class action suit. That would only seem reasonable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia. Is there anybody else online that would like to comment tonight? This is the last call for that. At this point, I'd like to continue the city council hearing. Do we have any communications? Oh, do you want to communicate? 26? That came in at 72, yes. All right, so we're going to take communications.
Right, the city council is, well, the city clerk's office was in receipt of a communication in favor from Emerson Damon. Communication in favor from Deanna Fay representing Housing for All. She did submit that petition as well in person here tonight, but I counted out the signatures and there's 109 Gloucester signatures and 3 Rockport signatures on that. And speaking, submitting communications in opposition, we have a communication from Pippi Galano. From, let's see, Robert Casey. Pamela Steele. Wendy Wyman. Dick Paholic. Beverly Johnson. And Rebecca Hill.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Clerk. So, Councilor Groff.
Can you just explain that we all get copies of that communication so that we're not reading them tonight, but we will all have access to them?
Exactly. All right, so at this point, I'd like to continue this public hearing until September 26th at 6:30 here. I don't think we need to go for a vote for continuance. So that will be it for the city council tonight. I'll hand this over to the planning board for the work that they'd like to have taken care of.
Thank you, Sean. We too will be continuing our public hearing to the September 26th meeting. Again, we are here as a referral from the city council on our application. And so I'll accept the motion to continue the public hearing to 9/26.
So move.
Have a motion and a second, please. Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for coming tonight. And Tracy, I'll talk to you in 1 second.
Motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Roll
Roll
call.
call
Roll
vote.
call.
All right, so who was it moved and
I want to
seconded by?
get the
I'm
most
sorry.
out of my roll call.
It was moved by Councilor Grow.
Seconded by Councilman Hart.
Okay, Councilor Grow.
Aye.
Councilor Majota.
Aye.
Councilor Memhard.
Aye.
Councilor Nolan.
Aye.
Councilor Worthley.
Aye.
Councilor Benson.
Aye.
Councilor Gilman.
Aye.
Councilor Grace.
Aye.
Councilor Gross.
Aye.
Motion to adjourn at 9:29 passes 9 in favor, 0 opposed. We are adjourned.
Planning board has this.
Second. Have a motion by Sean and seconded by Hank. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Awesome, guys. Nice job.